I can't believe this, Emily muttered under her breath as she fumbled through her bag, trying not to draw attention from the other passengers on the crowded flight. She had been nervous about this moment for weeks, and now, with the plane humming steadily at 30,000 feet, it was happening whether she was ready or not. Her fingers brushed against something small and rectangular, and before she realized it, a photograph of her baby slipped from her grasp and tumbled onto the floor near the aisle. Jason Whitman, sitting a row ahead, bent down to pick it up, his brow furrowed as he examined the picture. Emily froze in her seat, her heart hammering, not knowing what to say. The photo showed her baby smiling in a tiny yellow onesie, chubby little hands reaching for the camera, a picture so full of innocence and love that it made Emily's chest ache. Jason held it carefully, his expression a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something else Emily couldn't quite identify. For a moment, the hum of the plane and the chatter of other passengers faded into the background. She wanted to reach for it, to take it back, but her fingers trembled, and she stayed rooted to her seat, trying to make herself small. "You were never going to tell me?" Jason's voice broke the silence, soft but loaded with disbelief. Emily swallowed hard, feeling a rush of warmth and fear flooding her at the same time. She hadn't expected him to react like this, not here, not in front of strangers. Her mind raced, thinking about the secret she had carried for so long, the careful choices she had made to keep her personal life private while navigating the pressures of everyday work and travel. She could feel the tension in the air between them, an invisible thread pulling tighter with every passing second. Around them, people were focused on their own worlds, some glancing curiously but quickly turning back to their phones or books, oblivious to the delicate moment unfolding. Emily's eyes met Jason's, searching for a clue in his gaze, something that would tell her whether he would understand, whether he would judge, whether this was the end or just the beginning. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of dread and hope, and for a fleeting second, she wondered if she had made a mistake. But the innocence captured in that photograph reminded her why she had chosen to carry her secret so carefully, why this tiny life mattered more than any embarrassment or awkward conversation. Jason's hand lingered on the photo, his thumb gently brushing the corner, and Emily could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, a man used to control and clarity suddenly faced with a mystery he hadn't anticipated. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, filling the space with a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat syncing with her own as she tried to steady her nerves. She realized this flight would not just take them across the country, but would carry the weight of unspoken truths and unexpected revelations, a journey that neither of them could have predicted when they first boarded. Every second stretched as she waited for him to say something else, to give her some indication of how this encounter would unfold. And in that suspended moment, Emily felt the gravity of what had just happened, the vulnerability of exposing a part of her life she had shielded so carefully, and the tentative spark of connection that might just grow from this unplanned revelation high above the clouds. Emily took a deep breath and tried to calm the rapid beating of her heart as she watched Jason carefully place the photograph back on her tray table without a word. The air in the cabin felt charged, as if the space around them had become smaller, more intimate, filled with unspoken questions and quiet tension. She shifted slightly in her seat, trying to gather her thoughts, knowing that every second counted and that the moment she had been avoiding for so long was now unavoidable. Jason leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers, a mixture of curiosity and something softer reflecting in his gaze, making her wonder how much he was trying to understand. Around them, the flight attendants moved silently up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, their presence almost like background music to the silent drama unfolding between the two of them. Emily reached for her bag again, pretending to look for something, but her hand hovered over the zipper, hesitant, as if the bag itself held the weight of her secret. She remembered the nights she had spent wondering if she could ever share this part of her life with someone who mattered, someone who could be trusted, and now the reality of facing Jason was overwhelming in ways she had not anticipated. Jason finally spoke, his voice calm but measured. "Emily, I do not know the whole story yet, but I want to understand." The words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made Emily pause. She nodded slightly, feeling a small sense of relief mixed with anxiety. and decided to start from the beginning, explaining in her own words how her life had changed and why she had kept certain truths to herself. As she spoke, she noticed subtle shifts in Jason's expression, the softening of his brow, the slight nods that encouraged her to continue, and the way his hands remained still, attentive, never interrupting, giving her space to unfold her story. Time seemed to stretch as the plane cruised steadily through the clouds, the sunlight streaming through the windows casting a warm glow over them, making the cabin feel like a quiet sanctuary away from the rest of the world. Emily could sense a bridge forming between them, fragile yet significant, a connection built not on casual conversation, but on honesty and vulnerability shared in a confined space miles above the ground. She felt the weight of her earlier fears lift slightly as she continued to speak, and she realized that the fear of judgment she had carried for so long might finally be met with understanding rather than rejection. Jason remained silent for a few moments after she finished, processing everything she had shared, his gaze thoughtful, and then he reached out just enough to touch the corner of the photograph gently, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement and empathy. In that moment, Emily felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that this encounter could mark the beginning of trust and perhaps even a new chapter in both of their lives, one where secrets could be shared and connections deepened despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Jason shifted slightly in his seat, careful not to startle Emily, as he processed the story she had just shared. The hum of the plane continued around them, but for a moment, it felt as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them and the fragile connection forming between them. Emily traced her finger along the edge of the photograph, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension as she spoke, filling in the details of her daily life, the challenges she faced as a single mother, and the quiet moments of joy that had kept her going. Jason listened intently, his posture relaxed but alert, nodding occasionally to show he was fully present and invested in what she was saying. The sunlight shifted through the window, casting patterns across the seats, illuminating Emily's face in a way that made her expression soft and earnest. She could see Jason weighing every word, his eyes reflecting a growing understanding and a subtle warmth that had not been there when the flight began. There was a sense of balance forming, an unspoken agreement that this conversation, difficult as it was necessary and meaningful. Emily felt a cautious trust begin to replace the nervous tension that had gripped her, and she allowed herself to breathe more freely as she recounted small anecdotes about her baby, stories that were at once humorous and heartwarming, revealing the depth of her love and dedication. Jason responded not with judgment, but with thoughtful comments and questions, creating a rhythm of dialogue that felt natural, supportive, and honest. Around them, the passengers remained absorbed in their own worlds, unaware of the intimate exchange unfolding just a few rows away, which allowed Emily to feel a sense of privacy despite the public setting. As the minutes passed, the initial shock that had filled the cabin seemed to fade, replaced by curiosity, empathy, and a tentative bond that neither of them had expected when the photograph first fell. Jason's hand moved slightly, almost reflexively, to gesture in acknowledgement of her story, a small but significant act that conveyed his willingness to understand and connect. Emily noticed this and felt a flicker of hope, a belief that honesty could create bridges even in the most unlikely circumstances. She realized that this moment on the plane, high above the ground, was more than just a conversation. It was an opportunity to be seen and understood in a way she had not allowed herself before. The tension in her chest eased as she spoke, and Jason's attentive presence provided a steady anchor, a reassurance that she was not alone in navigating the complexities of her life and the emotions stirred by revealing so much of herself. The flight continued, the landscape below shifting in patterns of clouds and sunlight, and within the cabin, a quiet understanding settled, delicate but real, a beginning that promised the possibility of trust, respect, and perhaps an unexpected friendship built from a shared moment of vulnerability that neither Emily nor Jason would forget. Emily shifted in her seat once more, feeling the subtle sway of the plane beneath them as she continued to share the smaller details of her daily life, the moments that made her laugh and the tiny victories that kept her spirits alive despite the challenges of raising her child alone. Jason leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, eyes focused intently on her expressions, taking in not only the words but the emotion behind them. Noticing the way her hands moved when she described her routines and the gentle pauses that hinted at memories too precious to rush through. The cabin lights cast a soft glow over them, and the occasional shimmer of sunlight through the windows highlighted the sincerity in her eyes, making the moment feel more intimate and personal than either of them could have anticipated. Emily felt a growing sense of ease as she recounted the little things she often overlooked when talking to others, the quiet joys of watching her baby discover the world, the simple routines that had become her anchor, and the fleeting moments of triumph that filled her with pride. Jason responded with thoughtful questions, not intrusive but curious, showing genuine interest and creating a rhythm that encouraged her to open up further, building a bridge between their experiences even in this transient setting high above the ground. Around them, other passengers moved about their own worlds, some reading, some watching movies, the distant murmur of conversation forming a background hum that allowed Emily to feel safe in the private bubble that had formed between them. She noticed Jason's subtle reactions, the way he leaned in when something particularly meaningful was shared, the slight nods that confirmed his understanding, and the gentle gestures that communicated empathy without words, making her feel truly heard for the first time in a long while. The photograph rested on the tray between them, a quiet symbol of the story she had entrusted to him, connecting them in a way that neither obligation nor casual acquaintance could have achieved. Emily realized that sharing this part of her life, while nerve-wracking, was not met with judgment, but with the careful attention of someone willing to see her as a whole person, her experiences, her love, and her challenges included. The clouds outside the window drifted lazily beneath them, mirroring the calm that was settling in her mind as she spoke, and she felt a tentative hope bloom, a recognition that honesty could create understanding even in the most unlikely of circumstances. Jason finally exhaled softly, the first relaxed expression she had seen, and it struck her as a quiet acknowledgement of the trust she had placed in him, a gesture that conveyed acceptance without needing to say a single word. Emily sat back slightly, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation, realizing that this journey had transformed into more than just a flight across the country. It had become a passage through vulnerability, connection, and the potential for a deeper understanding between two people who had met by chance, but now shared something meaningful. Every shift in their conversation, every glance and pause, reinforced the sense that this unexpected encounter could lead to a foundation built on trust, empathy, and the small, significant steps of opening oneself to another, a journey that neither Emily nor Jason could have predicted when the plane had first taken off. Emily glanced out the window as the sunlight began to shift toward the late afternoon, painting the clouds in shades of gold and soft pink, and she felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation settling in her chest. Jason remained attentive beside her, his posture relaxed yet engaged, the subtle changes in his expressions revealing that he was processing everything she had shared while also reflecting on his own thoughts. The photograph between them seemed almost to anchor the moment, a quiet emblem of trust and the story that had unfolded so far, connecting them in a way that words alone could not. Emily described some of the routines that had become small rituals for her and her child, the moments of quiet reading before naps, the gentle laughter during playtime, and the fleeting but meaningful accomplishments that filled her days with a sense of purpose. Jason listened, asking thoughtful questions and occasionally making gentle observations that showed he was not only hearing her words, but also considering the depth behind them, creating an atmosphere where Emily felt both safe and validated. Around them, the other passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, unaware of the exchange that had transformed the space into something intimate and personal, a small sanctuary of shared understanding amid the hum of the plane. Emily found herself becoming more comfortable, more willing to speak freely, as she noticed the genuine curiosity and careful attentiveness in Jason's eyes, the way he nodded or leaned in at just the right moments, providing encouragement without pressure. She spoke of the little surprises and joys that her child brought into her life, the small milestones that might seem ordinary to an outsider but carried immense significance for her, and she noticed the way Jason's expression softened with each story, a mixture of empathy and appreciation reflecting in his gaze. The plane continued on its path, the steady vibration under their feet blending with the quiet murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of service carts. But all of it seemed secondary to the unfolding dialogue between them. Emily realized that the act of sharing these personal details, something she had once feared might create distance or judgment, was instead creating a subtle bond, a mutual understanding that felt both unexpected and reassuring. Jason reached out briefly, gesturing toward the photograph with a small smile that conveyed acknowledgement and acceptance, a gesture that made Emily feel both seen and respected. In that moment, the cabin and the flight transformed into more than just a journey from one city to another. It became a space for vulnerability, honesty, and the beginnings of connection that neither of them had anticipated, a gentle unfolding of trust and openness that promised to shape their interaction long after the plane touched down. Emily shifted in her seat, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she glanced at Jason, noticing the subtle warmth in his expression that had grown since their conversation began. The plane continued to glide smoothly through the air, and the low murmur of fellow passengers seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the quiet intensity of their exchange. She spoke about her favorite moments with her child, the little triumphs like learning to walk or saying a first word, and the way these small victories brought a sense of pride and joy that was difficult to convey to anyone who had not experienced it firsthand. Jason listened intently, his hands resting lightly on his knees, leaning just enough to show engagement without intruding, and Emily felt the unspoken reassurance that he genuinely wanted to understand. Each story she told, each detail of daily life that might seem mundane to others, became a bridge between them, creating empathy and connection in the confined space of the cabin. She noticed the way his eyes softened at certain anecdotes, a gentle smile forming when she mentioned her child's favorite game or the way laughter filled her home, and it encouraged her to continue, to share more openly than she had planned. The sunlight shifted through the windows, painting patterns across the seats and casting a warm glow that made the atmosphere feel more intimate, more personal, as if the plane itself had become a private room for their conversation. Emily felt a growing confidence in revealing her experiences, recognizing that Jason's calm and attentive demeanor provided a safe space for her to express the parts of her life she had kept carefully guarded. Around them, the flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, offering service. Yet the ordinary routine of the cabin contrasted sharply with the significance of the dialogue unfolding at Emily's row. Jason asked thoughtful questions, not probing but reflective, showing he was invested in understanding the nuances of her story, and Emily responded with honesty, recounting the challenges she had faced and the moments that had strengthened her resilience and love for her child. The photograph remained on the tray table, a silent symbol of trust, occasionally catching the light in ways that drew both their eyes, reinforcing the shared significance of what had been revealed. Emily realized that the plane, a space that had once felt impersonal and transient, had transformed into a vessel carrying not just passengers, but the unfolding of a meaningful connection built on openness, empathy, and the courage to share life's intimate truths. Jason's subtle gestures and attentive posture communicated that he recognized the vulnerability required to share such personal details, and Emily felt a rare sense of being understood without judgment, a feeling that left her both relieved and cautiously hopeful. As the minutes passed, she sensed that their interaction was shaping into something enduring, a foundation of trust and mutual respect, and the journey across the sky mirrored the slow, deliberate progress of understanding and connection being built quietly between them, one story and one moment at a time. Emily leaned back in her seat, feeling the gentle sway of the plane as it continued its steady path through the sky, and she realized how much lighter she felt now that she had spoken so openly about her life. Jason remained beside her, his gaze thoughtful, occasionally flicking toward the photograph with a quiet reverence that made Emily appreciate the care with which he was receiving her story. She continued to share small details, like the bedtime rituals that had become comforting routines, the way her child's laughter could brighten even the hardest days, and the moments of quiet reflection that gave her perspective and resilience. Jason listened with an attentiveness that went beyond mere politeness, his eyes focused, his expressions subtle but responsive, indicating that he was truly absorbing not only the facts of her life, but also the emotions and meaning behind them. The cabin around them moved on with its ordinary rhythm, passengers reading, watching movies, or quietly conversing. Yet for Emily and Jason, the space felt suspended, private, a bubble where understanding and connection could develop uninterrupted. She noticed the way Jason occasionally tilted his head or leaned slightly forward, gestures that encouraged her to continue sharing without fear of judgment, and it made her feel seen in a way she had rarely experienced. The sunlight shifted as the plane moved westward, casting warm streaks across the seats and illuminating subtle details in the photograph, the little smile of her child frozen in time, which seemed to echo the intimacy and trust building between them. Emily spoke of her hopes for the future, small dreams that centered on stability, happiness, and moments of joy, and Jason responded with gentle questions and observations, not intrusive, but designed to show that he valued her perspective and experiences. Each shared story, each careful disclosure, strengthened the sense of trust, creating a rhythm of dialogue that was both comforting and engaging, a rare balance of vulnerability met with genuine interest and respect. She realized that the simple act of sharing these personal moments on a plane, surrounded by strangers, had unexpectedly become a turning point in her day, a chance to be fully understood and acknowledged. Jason's calm presence and subtle affirmations offered reassurance, and Emily felt the cautious hope that this encounter might not only provide clarity and empathy in the moment, but also lay the groundwork for future conversations and understanding. The photograph remained between them, a quiet reminder of the catalyst that had brought them to this point, and Emily sensed that the trust she had placed in Jason was being met with care and attentiveness, a reciprocal respect that made the remainder of the flight feel less like a journey through the clouds and more like a shared experience of connection, openness, and the tentative beginnings of a meaningful relationship formed through honesty and understanding. The plane began its gradual descent, and Emily felt a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy as she glanced at Jason, noticing how the soft afternoon light highlighted the attentive expression on his face. The photograph still rested between them, a small but significant reminder of the journey they had shared through words and emotions over the past hours. Emily recounted a few more moments, simple scenes from daily life that carried meaning, like the first steps her child had taken across the living room floor and the quiet evenings spent reading stories together, and she noticed Jason leaning in slightly, his eyes reflecting interest and a quiet admiration for the resilience and dedication she exhibited. The hum of the engines seemed to synchronize with the gentle rhythm of their conversation, a steady backdrop that made the cabin feel calm and private despite the presence of other passengers going about their routines. Emily felt encouraged by Jason's subtle reactions, the way he nodded thoughtfully or offered gentle comments that showed he was absorbing not only the facts of her life, but also the emotions that accompanied them, creating a sense of validation and mutual respect. She described the small victories that made her days meaningful, the moments of laughter and learning with her child, and the sense of accomplishment that came from navigating challenges that were often invisible to the outside world. Jason listened without interruption, giving her space to express herself fully while also providing quiet acknowledgement that her experiences mattered and were understood. The sunlight shifted as the plane descended, casting warm patterns across the seats and highlighting the soft features of Emily's face, creating an atmosphere that felt intimate and reflective, as if the plane itself had become a vessel for shared understanding. She realized that the connection they had formed was not only about the stories themselves, but also about the trust required to reveal personal details to someone new, and the tentative bond between them felt strengthened by every word spoken and every subtle gesture of attentiveness. Jason asked a few reflective questions, his tone gentle and considerate, encouraging her to explore her thoughts further and express the feelings that accompanied each memory, which allowed Emily to feel a sense of relief and comfort in being heard without judgment. Around them, other passengers began to prepare for landing, adjusting seats and collecting belongings, yet the space between Emily and Jason remained focused and calm, a quiet island amid the ordinary activity of the cabin. Emily felt a sense of closure for the conversation that had unfolded, paired with the realization that this moment, though temporary in the context of the flight, had created a lasting impression of connection, understanding, and respect, a shared experience that neither of them would soon forget. As the plane moved closer to the airport, the soft glow of the afternoon sun illuminated both of their faces, signaling not just the approach of their physical destination, but also the meaningful transition of the bond they had begun to build high above the clouds, a foundation of trust, empathy, and the potential for continued openness in the moments to come. As the plane touched down smoothly and the wheels rolled across the runway, Emily felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, the tension of the past hours easing into a sense of accomplishment and quiet excitement for what lay ahead. She glanced at Jason, who had remained composed throughout the descent, yet there was a softness in his eyes that mirrored her own sense of reflection and thoughtfulness. The cabin lights adjusted as the plane taxied toward the gate, casting a warm glow that highlighted the photograph on the tray between them, a silent testament to the shared vulnerability and honesty that had defined their flight together. Emily spoke briefly about the practicalities of arrival, discussing which terminal they would exit and how she would navigate the airport with her luggage and carry-on items. Yet even these mundane details were framed within the broader sense of trust and mutual understanding that had developed. Jason listened carefully, occasionally offering practical suggestions and light comments that made Emily smile, a subtle ease settling over the conversation as the familiarity between them grew despite the short time they had shared. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, stretching, and preparing for the transition from air to ground. But Emily and Jason remained immersed in their dialogue, the intimacy of the shared space persisting even as the external environment shifted. Emily reflected on how rare it was to find someone who could listen so attentively, without judgment, and who could engage with the details of her life in a manner that felt genuine, and she felt a renewed sense of confidence in the choices she had made in her personal and professional life. Jason, in turn, acknowledged her reflections with nods and affirming statements, creating a rhythm of dialogue that reinforced the connection they had established and allowed both of them to recognize the value of the time spent together. The photograph remained in view, capturing the innocent smile of her child and serving as a reminder of the catalyst for their conversation, a symbol of trust and the meaningful disclosure that had sparked a deeper understanding between them. As the plane came to a full stop and the seatbelt signs illuminated, Emily felt a quiet anticipation for the moments that would follow outside the aircraft, recognizing that the encounter on the flight had created a foundation of respect, empathy, and openness that could extend beyond the confines of the cabin. Jason offered a gentle smile and a reassuring tone as they prepared to disembark, a subtle acknowledgement of the shared journey and the unspoken possibilities that lay ahead, creating a sense of closure to the flight, yet leaving the narrative open to continuation in the interactions and choices that awaited them on the ground. Emily felt a sense of gratitude and cautious optimism, knowing that the honesty and trust shared in this brief but meaningful experience had transformed a routine flight into a significant chapter of connection, understanding, and the potential for continued relationship built on empathy, communication, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability together as they stepped into the terminal and the next stage of their story began.